So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. You're a game master, and the ever-present question is, what should you prep? Well, we're going to give you a very, very simple answer to that. You prep the things that you can't make up easily on the spot, and you don't prep anything else. No, I'm kidding. But, James, this was a great idea for a topic. You brought it up, so hit me. What are the things that you prep that you would rather not make up on the spot?
You said it very well yourself. All the things that I know, and this will be different for everybody, that I can't make up on the spot or that I don't feel comfortable winging. So for example, a big one for me is physical spaces. If the players are ever going to be touching the space you're describing, there should be a little bit of a maybe back and forth. You describe it and then they tell you, maybe you allow the players to ask questions, right? But no matter what, anytime you're describing a physical space that the players are going to interact with, it's difficult if there's not some visual aid or something, right? There's a lot of tools you can use. So instead of considering the description of a physical space something that you write out, it's more just whatever tool you use to make it clear in the player's mind. So for some instances, that may be, here's a map, and I'm going to tell you, what these pillars on the map are. But sometimes a room's not so complicated that, well, you don't need all that, but you do need to know that, hey, well, it's 30 feet. But what you're going to prep is, well, what else is 30 feet that somebody would know, right? You can give them relative distances, things like that. If you prepare all of those things for each room you go into, it's going to be different. It depends on the specific thing, but it's whatever thing, say, about that physical space that you can't wing, right? If there are church pews in there, you can tell them how many there are to the front. And that would be a better way to describe how big it was if somebody's ever been in a big cathedral than telling them how many feet it was to the front. And then, like you said, well, then I'll make up all the rest. I'm going to make up the description of when a sword comes down on one of the pews and smashes it in half because, well, that's the improv part of the game. So there's a lot to this question, but that's physical space is one of the big things that I start with.
Yeah, and that keeps you from telling everybody when they first walk into a place, it's a 30 by 10 room. Yeah, that's actually really smart.
It's got 20-foot high ceilings, and it was built by masons, and you're like, listen, what?
Yeah, so one of the things that I always go out of my way to prep, just because I think it's very important, and it's not necessarily that I couldn't improv it, but that crafting it, I think, gives you much better mileage, is I will always specifically write out exactly what the opening scene of my game is going to be. When we say, okay, we're going to start playing, game is starting now, what do I do in that very initial moment to get the game started? Because especially when you're running a lot of narrative games and things like that, like the tone and the style of the game can be very important, and the opening scene can be an absolutely fantastic way to set the direction right from the bat. So if you're playing, everyone's in the call, people are laughing and joking, but you're playing a bit more of a serious game. If you can open that game with a bit of somber music and like some sort of dark narration about the difficulty and the struggle that the party's been going through, versus just like, okay, so you're just around, what do you guys do? Like, having something that you've crafted to sort of get the game in motion is going to go a long way towards making it feel how you want it to feel, and it sort of gets everybody down on the same track, which I think makes it so much easier to then improv everything after that, because you've kind of got this very strong foundation and direction, and I think it's a lot easier to improvise if you're following a direction that's already been established versus just trying to pull something out of the ether entirely. So I that's the thing that it's my biggest sort of hack for my games, is when I start the game, I know exactly how I'm going to describe the intro, exactly what I'm going to do to set the tone, exactly what characters I'm going to bring in and how, who's going to have the first say, and how I'll set up the initial action of the game and of the scene, and bring in the different player characters, and like who's going to interact with who based on what they see, and I'll sort of plot out exactly sort of how that's going to go ahead of time. And then it's so much easier for everything else just to follow down that line, and it gets the players in track with how I want them to feel and how I want them to engage with each other. So yeah, it's just, I think, one of the most helpful things that I've ever done and seen other game masters do, and I've very much stolen it for myself. Of like, if you can set up the beginning, everything else will follow much more easily. So that's my major trick for sure.
For me, I came to the realization that lore and storytelling never slow down my games. What slows down my games are mechanics and me not being as familiar or confident with them. Because I can confidently jump in a direction with a story and not be worried about it. But what I found was when the players were using their character sheets against the mechanical threats that I had put in the game, I was underprepared. And so, as simple as this sounds, I'm going to give you this one thing that has really helped me, which is come up with a mechanical anchor for the session. Everyone's sessions are different, but what I mean to say is it's an encounter, whether it's monsters or the environment or a skill challenge or any of that, that you know very well. You're confident so that you can run it smoothly, and that when the players ask you a question, you don't have to refer to your notes, you don't have to refer to a stat block and that kind of thing. And that helped so much. I actually just had this happen in a game I ran the other night. Jeff helped me with it. We did a skill challenge. I knew exactly how I was going to handle it. I knew the difficulty. I knew how many rolls. And I rehearsed that in my head a couple of days before. And then I anchored it all down the day of, and I just kept thinking about it. And it made that go like this. Same thing with monster stat blocks. It's fun to choose a monster, and the art's cool, or there's an ability that's neat. I'm telling you, the mileage you'll get out of just reading through the stat block, reading through their abilities, and then thinking, okay, well, how can I use this well? How is this designed? Oh, cool. This monster gets a bonus when it's next to another monster. Well, guess what? They're going to fight 3 pairs of monsters because they're always going to have this bonus. And if you go into it thinking that way, and you know the armor class roughly, and you know what their attack is, and you know what you're rolling, and you have that all, it does seem like a lot of bookkeeping, but that's the part that slows me down. And it's the part where when the narrative, character description of the sword coming down and it hits, and then it's my turn to do something with these monsters, and I have my head in a book. Or I'm looking up D&D Beyond, and I'm like, 30 feet. It just breaks that. But if I know in my head, these monsters are great at this, they're going to act like this, and this is what their AC is and all that stuff, it lets me now do the heavy lifting on the storytelling and keep the pace of the combat going. So whatever mechanical thing you have, prepare it. That's just as much, and maybe even more, especially for me, homework to make sure you're just inside and out on, and have one of those ready per session. Now, the players are going to do their own thing, and you might need more, but if you have one mechanical anchor, I'm going to do this skill challenge where they're going to have this fight with these orcs, and it's going to be like this. It made it so much easier for me, and then I could focus on everything else in the game. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think that brings up sort of an interesting point to this whole situation, is that these things are all going to be very independent and personal for you. So just to flip this sort of around, for me, I know, and this is not me trying to be like, oh, I know so much more about this than Tim, because it goes the other way on so many different things. But for me personally, I don't need to spend that much time preparing stat blocks and things like that, because my brain works very well with mechanics and with numbers and rules, especially when it comes to these sorts of things. So it's very easy for me to feel comfortable making up a monster stat block on the spot during a game or something. Whereas I think the other way around is Tim might have a much easier time coming up with cool thematic story intros and things like that because he's great at story. So it's these are very individual things of you need to find out kind of for yourself, and you can really only do this by running games and just sort of seeing how it goes of oh, when they asked me about this, that caught me off guard and I felt like it made me stumble, versus when I had to do this, I felt very comfortable and it just sort of came naturally. like just another super simple one for me. I will, in all my games that I run, I will keep a list next to me just of names that make sense in the setting. Because it's a universal GM scenario that like we've all been in, of just like the players get into a town, they're talking with a random guy who you expect to just be nobody, just purely a plot device or, set dressing. And then suddenly they become very interested in this person's life and they're like, oh, what's your name? And it's just like, that's such like a stupid stumbling point to then hit of just be like, oh, I don't know. Shoot, I'll have to make something up. And it can like, and then depending on like the tone of the game, sometimes it's fine and funny. But if you're trying to run something that's supposed to be like more serious, and then you have to make up a name and maybe it's going to be stupid. And, it's like such a weird way for like your thought process and your flow to be derailed. So it's just like, I always stumble at that. If a player says, what's this guy's name? I never have a good answer, ever. So I just have a list of names next to me. That's just like, if someone asks, what's this guy's name? I just point at a name and say, that's his name. And it's such a silly thing to like get hung up on. But it did hang me up in my games. So it's just like a little hack that I've now made of just like, all right, here's 20 names to pick from if I need a name for this person or this culture or that culture. Here they are. And then I can just go. So yeah, it's just another little thing that I'll make in advance just to avoid that specific scenario because of how much it like frazzles my brain.
I love that because I have also had the same problem, and I have another hack that I've started using, which is, and this helps me from not accidentally calling an NPC Ben Stiller, because you'll never live that down. That really happened. So the thing that I do now, and everyone, this is your homework. If you have nothing else that you take from this video, this is what I want you to do. I know you're all watching television shows. Everyone is. I know you are. Or movies. The side characters in those movies are now your NPCs that are just hanging out in the region. So pull whoever, come up with a name like Jeff said, and then you know them inside and out. You can even put a note, like it's Hopper from Stranger Things. Boom, you're there. And you put the name Hopper from Stranger Things. Now, when you need a random person, the plot device, the thing that Jeff's talking about, you look at your list and you go, this is the perfect time to introduce Hopper from Stranger Things. And then they come on camera and they can leave and they can come in and out. But that has saved me a ton, is just make 2 or 3 real people that are just mucking about. And then that way you don't have to come up with that, I don't know, it's a goblin. It's a goblin? No, it's Ben Stiller. So anyway, that's my hack. It's Ben Stiller the Goblin, hanging out with Kirkus. We're Tabletop Terrors. If you like this sort of video, you'll know that what we're all about is fun, creativity, and tabletop games. And so consider subscribing so that you'll get notifications about these videos. We'd love to hear comments. So for this one, what's that thing? And everyone has that white whale or that Achilles tendon. Your prep falls down in this area. What's that thing you need help with that you're like, I'm going to cop to it. This is what I always have to prep or I will botch it. And then what's your trick to actually prep it? We are going to end things with a Tabtarian toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Slancha.
My favorite part about filming this video was that in multiple cases, in directly describing things that we were suggesting you prep and don't try to come up with on the spot, we tried to come up with them on the spot. And each of us fumbled every time we did it. It's just briefly, but we were like, and you should prep things like an area, right? Like a room. And I then proceed to try to describe a physical space and do so poorly. And I'm like, so you guys see what we're trying to get here, right? So I had that epiphany during the video and had to write it down because it was just the most ridiculous thing.
It's almost as if we should have prepped a really good example of each of these things to show how it could be done. And we didn't.
If you need a name in the moment, just like, a name like a name, list. Have a list.
A list is a good idea. Yeah. Because
it.
in that moment, when you're at the table, you're thinking, man, if only I had a list of this prepared.
Yep. So there you go. That was all planned. You just been usual suspect.
Yeah, probably one of the most ridiculous, constructs that exist. It's a non-example. Yeah, no, I'm doing it to show you what not to do.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.